For 11 years, my in-laws called me the mistake my brother made. Not to my face, they were too polished for that. They said it at Thanksgiving dinners when they thought I was in the kitchen. They said it at my mother-in-law's birthday party while I was parking the car. My husband, my ex-husband, now never once corrected them. He'd just refill his wine glass and change the subject. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if I just worked harder, smiled wider, and asked for less, the people around me would eventually decide I was worth keeping. I was wrong. But it took losing everything to figure that out, and it took one person I barely knew to show me what being truly valued actually feels like. I met my ex-husband Daniel when I was 22 and fresh out of nursing school. He was charming and confident, and his family had money, old money, the kind that came with a last name people recognized and expectations I didn't fully understand until it was too late. His mother, Patricia, made it clear from our first dinner together that I was not what she had envisioned for her son. She'd asked me what my father did for work. When I told her he drove a delivery truck, she smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile and said, "How practical." I spent 7 years in that marriage trying to earn my place. I worked double shifts at the hospital so Daniel could launch a business that failed twice. I skipped my own birthday 3 years in a row, because his family had prior commitments that somehow always took priority. I lent his younger sister, Rachel, $4,000 for a car she needed for a job interview. She got the job. She never paid me back. When I brought it up once gently, apologetically, my mother-in-law looked at me like I had asked to be compensated for breathing their air. When Daniel and I finally divorced, he left me for someone his mother actually approved of. I walked away with my nursing license, my scrubs, and a checking account with $340 in it. His family kept the condo we'd picked out together. They kept the dog. They kept the story too, the one where I was difficult and ungrateful, and simply hadn't been right for their family. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from the hospital. I worked nights. I ate a lot of rice and eggs. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was, because I was too ashamed to admit that 7 years of trying had left me with almost nothing. The one person who knew the truth was my coworker, Maya. Maya had worked in the same cardiac unit as me for 3 years. We weren't close at first. She was quiet, methodical, the kind of nurse who double-checked everything twice and never seemed rattled. But the night after my divorce was finalized, I had a meltdown in the break room at 2 a.m, ugly crying into a paper towel over a cup of instant coffee, and Maya sat down next to me without saying a word and slid half of her granola bar across the table. That was how our friendship started. She didn't push me to talk. She didn't offer advice I hadn't asked for. She just showed up consistently, quietly, in the small ways that turn out to matter most. She'd leave a sandwich in my locker on nights she knew I'd skip dinner. When my car needed a repair I couldn't afford, she drove me to and from the hospital for 2 weeks without once mentioning it. She was the only person in my life who treated my situation as something worth helping with, rather than something to be embarrassed by. I didn't tell her about the inheritance for a long time. I didn't tell anyone. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Nana Ruth, had been quietly wealthy in a way our family never fully understood while she was alive. She'd grown up with nothing, married a man who invested carefully in land in rural Georgia in the 1970s, and by the time she passed away 18 months ago at 87, that land had been sold to a development company for just over $2 million. She had one surviving child, my mother, and my mother, who had her own complicated reasons for wanting nothing to do with money management, signed the inheritance over to me. $3,200,000 after taxes and legal fees. I sat in my attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon in March and read that number 4 times. I asked him to repeat it out loud. He did. I drove home, sat in my parking lot for 45 minutes, and then went inside and ate a bowl of cereal because I genuinely did not know what else to do. I told no one. Not my mother, who would have immediately told her sisters. Not my friends from college, who had slowly drifted into Daniel's orbit after the divorce. No one at the hospital. No one in my apartment building. The only thing I changed was that I hired a financial advisor and a lawyer, quietly, through a firm in a different city. I kept going to work. I kept eating rice and eggs. I kept driving my 2014 Honda Civic with the cracked rear bumper. And then I decided to do something I'm still not entirely proud of, but which I believe with my whole heart I needed to do. I decided to find out who would show up for me if I had nothing. 3 months after the inheritance, I called my ex-mother-in-law. This was not something I did lightly. I rehearsed it. I sat with it for 2 weeks. But I had a specific reason. Rachel, Daniel's younger sister, had reached out to me the previous month, very sweetly, to let me know that she was having trouble with rent and had heard I was doing okay. She didn't ask directly. She never did. She just left the door open and waited. I called Patricia on a Thursday evening and I told her I was in trouble. I said my hospital had gone through layoffs, not entirely false. There had been cuts, just not to my position, and that I was behind on rent and didn't have enough to cover my car insurance this month. I kept my voice steady and matter-of-fact because I'd learned that asking for help with too much emotion made people uncomfortable enough to say no more easily. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, I'm not sure why you're calling me. You and Daniel have been divorced for over a year." I said I understood that, and I was sorry to bother her, but I didn't have many options right now. She said, "You're a nurse. Surely the hospital has resources for employees." And then she said she had to get dinner started, and she'd pray for my situation. And she hung up. I called Rachel next. I told her the same thing. She said, "Oh no, that's so hard," and then said she was actually dealing with some financial stress herself right now, which I thought was interesting given that she'd just posted photos of a weekend trip to Charleston on her Instagram. I called Daniel. I didn't want to. I did it anyway. He picked up on the fourth ring and sounded annoyed before I'd even said anything. I explained my situation, same script, same calm voice. He said, "Claire, we're divorced. I can't be your safety net." And then, "Have you thought about picking up extra shifts?" I had been working extra shifts since before we met. He knew that. He had just never paid attention. I said, "You're right. I'm sorry I bothered you," and I hung up. And then I sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not sadness, not anger exactly, something more like clarity. Like a fog I'd been living inside of for a decade had just thinned out enough for me to see where I actually was. I did not call Maya. I wasn't going to do that to her. She was the one person I was not willing to test. But 2 weeks later, she tested herself without me asking. I had been sick. A bad flu that turned into something worse. A secondary infection that put me in bed for 5 days straight. I'd called out of work, which I almost never did, and I was running out of both energy and groceries. I hadn't told anyone. On the third day, I heard a knock at my door at 7:30 in the morning. I opened it and Maya was standing there in her street clothes. She'd just gotten off a night shift, holding a reusable bag with soup, electrolyte drinks, crackers, and a container of rice porridge she'd made herself. She said, "You didn't answer my text yesterday, and I got worried. I hope this is okay." She hadn't waited to be asked. She hadn't calculated what she'd get in return. She'd worked a 12-hour overnight shift, driven 40 minutes out of her way, and stood at my door with homemade food because she was worried about me. I started crying almost immediately, which embarrassed me, and she just set the bag down and hugged me this matter-of-fact, warm, "I've got you" hug, and said, "Okay, sit down. I'll heat the soup." I didn't tell her that day, but I knew. I knew she was the person I'd been waiting to find my whole adult life. Not a romantic partner, not a family member, just someone who showed up because showing up was who she was. I told her a month later. We were sitting on my couch on a Sunday afternoon, watching a home renovation show and sharing takeout, and I turned down the volume and told her there was something I needed to share with her. I watched her face while I explained it, the inheritance, the hiding, the calls I'd made to Daniel's family. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "So what are you going to do with it?" Not, "Why didn't you tell me," or "How much exactly," or any of the things I'd been bracing for. Just, "What are you going to do with it?" I said I wasn't entirely sure yet, but I knew part of it was going to change her life, if she'd let it. She frowned at me. "Claire," I said, "let me finish." I know you've been covering your mother's medical bills for 2 years. I know you put off your no-problem program because you can't afford the tuition and still pay rent. I know you're exhausted, and I know you never say so. She'd told me these things in fragments over 3 years of break room conversations. I didn't think she remembered how much she'd shared. Her eyes got wet. She looked away. She said, "You don't have to do anything." I said, "I know I don't have to. That's the point." I'd already spoken to my financial advisor. I'd already set aside what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to pay off her mother's remaining medical debt, about $60,000, and fully fund her nurse practitioner program, which would run her approximately $45,000 over 2 years. I told her it was a gift, not a loan, and that I would not accept any argument about it. She cried. I cried. It was a lot, but that was only part of what I'd been planning. What came next took about 4 months to put fully in motion, and I did it carefully, quietly, and with the help of a very good attorney. While I was married to Daniel, I had co-signed on a small business loan for his second company, the one that also failed. I'd been too in love and too eager to help at the time to understand what that meant. What it meant was that his family had leveraged my credit as part of a larger financial arrangement tied to one of his family's investment properties. I hadn't fully understood the structure at the time. My attorney had. She had also understood that the arrangement had been set up in a way that left some exposure. Specifically, it created a claim I was legally entitled to pursue. I am not going to walk through the legal details because they were genuinely complicated and honestly boring. But the short version is this. I had grounds to file a claim that would require Daniel's family to either buy out my interest at fair market value or restructure in a way that significantly reduced their investment position. We filed quietly. There were no dramatic confrontations. There were no phone calls where I revealed my hand. There was just a legal notice delivered to Patricia's home on a Wednesday morning in October, and then there was a very uncomfortable few months of back and forth between attorneys, and then there was a settlement. I was not looking to destroy them. I want to be clear about that. I was not trying to take everything they had. I simply wanted what I was owed, what I had been owed for years, and had been too afraid, too accommodating, too conditioned to ask for. The settlement was fair. It was significantly more than I had originally expected. And when it was over, I donated a portion of it, a meaningful portion, to a domestic workers' legal aid organization, because I knew I wasn't the only person who had been leveraged by people with more power. Rachel texted me 2 weeks after the settlement notice went out. She had apparently heard through Daniel. Her message said, "I can't believe you would do this to our family. After everything." After everything. I read that twice. And then I thought about the $4,000 she'd never repaid. I thought about the Thanksgiving table. I thought about the parking lot and the wine glass, and 7 years of trying. I didn't respond. Patricia called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was measured, but I could hear the strain in it. She said she hoped we could handle this maturely and without animosity. I saved the voicemail and sent the number to my attorney. Daniel texted a week later. It said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." I thought about responding for a full day. I thought about explaining everything, the years of feeling invisible, the birthday I spent alone because his family had a charity gala, the moment I realized he had never once defended me when his mother made those comments. I thought about sending him a list, a timeline, evidence. And then I thought about Maya, sitting on my couch, asking, "What are you going to do with it?" And I realized I didn't owe Daniel an explanation. I didn't owe him anything. I texted back, "Take care of yourself." And I meant it, sincerely, with zero attachment to whether he understood. The thing I want to tell you, the thing I most want you to hear, is that the money was never really the point. I know that sounds strange when the money is the part that changed the logistics. It paid off debts. It funded a future. It let me stop white-knuckling through every month. Those things are real, and I'm grateful for every single one of them. But what actually changed me was the moment I sat in my car after leaving the attorney's office and realized that I had spent 11 years trying to earn love from people who had decided before I walked in the door that I wasn't worth it. And no amount of double shifts or birthday sacrifices or gracious silence was ever going to change that verdict, because the verdict had never been about me. It had always been about them. The people who love you don't make you audition. Maya is in her second year of her nurse practitioner program now. She's already been offered a position at a cardiology practice that would double her current income. Her mother's medical bills are gone. She texts me photos sometimes of her mother at church or at family dinners, looking healthy and unburdened. Those photos do something to me I can't fully put into words. I left the cardiac unit 6 months ago and took a position at a smaller community clinic, the kind that serves patients who fall through every crack the system has. I took a pay cut. I have not once regretted it. I still live in the same one-bedroom apartment, though I've made it nicer. I hung real art on the walls. I bought a good mattress. I got a plant which I've kept alive for 7 months, which feels like a personal triumph. And some mornings I sit with my coffee and I think about Patricia's voicemail and Rachel's text and Daniel's complete failure to ever once ask me if I was okay, and I feel something I didn't expect to feel. I feel grateful for all of it, not because it didn't hurt. It did. It hurt for a long time. But because every single one of those moments was information, it was the world, slowly and somewhat mercilessly, telling me exactly who had decided I mattered and who was just keeping me around because I was convenient. The inheritance gave me options. But Maya, showing up at my door at 7:30 in the morning with rice porridge and no expectation of anything in return that gave me something the money couldn't, it gave me proof that I had been right to keep believing that kind of love existed. I just had to stop looking for it in the wrong places. If you're sitting somewhere right now feeling like you've been giving everything you have to people who keep telling you it isn't enough, I want you to hear this. The problem is not that you aren't enough. The problem is that you are in a room full of people who have already decided not to see you clearly. The door is not locked. It just takes everything you have to walk out. But on the other side, I promise you, there is someone who will show up with soup.